So one thing I always liked about this 91, 92 truck is they had this retractable bulb that you could just walk around and it would, I think it makes it to the back tire. So you can change your tire in the dark and use your truck's under hood light. They only used it for a year or two, and I don't know why. It was a very good idea, but I guess it kind of got the feeling that if you had to have this, it was because you broke down all the time. So I guess they stopped making it, but I always like that little feature. All right, so our 454 SS is going to have its engine yanked. We're going to rebuild that 454. I'm not going to do it, send it out, and then just install it again. And I want to talk about why. Now, I made a video on this truck is for sale, and the owner had a price in mind, and nobody really, I almost got it, almost got close, but I didn't quite get it. And I want to talk about the pricing for trucks like this and why most of the offers that we got were ridiculous. And that was a $1,500, $2,500 price. This is a 27-year-old truck, and we are in the Rust Belt. So we don't see trucks in this shape in our area at all, like period. So when you see one that's in great shape, not only the exterior but also the interior and underneath, with reasonable miles on it. It's got less than, it's got 180,000 kilometers, so just over 100,000 miles on it. Kelley Blue Book puts this truck at about $3,000. Now it's Michigan, now that's US, so we're probably looking at $4,500. But this truck isn't, I really don't care what Kelley Blue Book has to say. Trucks like this are worth whatever somebody's willing to pay for it. Regardless, about $4,000 was spent just in paint on this truck right before the engine blew. So there's no way in anybody's right mind they would spend $4 grand on a truck and then let it go for anything less than $8. But that being said, I know there's a lot more of these trucks down south, but tops, this truck will only ever be worth $20,000, somewhere there. I've seen them go a bit higher with very low kilometers on it. Somebody sent the link for one that has 15 miles on it. He took it straight home, or 7 miles, and it was starting bid on that was $50,000 US. We can't bring them over from the States and pay for the shipping and a paint job and probably an engine job and the taxes and brokerage and all of that time invested to do that, because the truck will never be worth more than 20. So at that point, you're already losing money. Having a truck like this in this shape in our area, running and moving, he should be able to get 15 for it as it is. Now, if I sold it without doing the engine work, I miss out on the labor to swap the engine and the fun to actually drive it. And these tires are bald, so they need to get burnt off the rest of the way. So it's in my best interest to actually change the engine. We were close to getting the price that he had in mind, and the guy was on the fence for a little bit and then decided, you know what, I'm not sure if that block is cracked or whatever. So he's going to let the owner figure that out, and then we'll decide from there. But we're going to yank this engine, and we're going to have a good time doing it. So here we go.
And now the most marvelous, wonderful Deboss.
There it is, 7.4 liters of just iron block garbage. So it's that 230 horsepower over 7.4 liters is what?
Awesome.
That's embarrassing is what it is. Bunch of broken exhaust manifolds, bolts. So I'll whip those off. I'm not touching this one, it's going straight to the machine shop. All right, so I have some news about the 454. Piston blew into 4 pieces, scored the cylinder. So that engine is no more. It's not worth building those engines if we're gonna keep the throttle body injection system, because you can only put so much fuel into it and you can make it breathe better. You just can't get enough fuel into it unless you change the whole fueling system. We're not gonna do that. We're gonna kinda keep it stock-ish. And V&R always has a shelf full of engines. So they had this one out of a motorhome. All right, this is our 454 donor engines out of a motorhome. It's not a 4-bolt main, but which is too bad, but those are actually extremely rare. Which is too bad because the one that came out was a 4-bolt main. We're gonna plastic gauge a rod and a main. We'll take a look at the bearings. If they look sketchy at all, we'll replace them. If they look okay, we'll probably leave them. The odometer said 30,000 kilometers on it. And keep in mind that this is a 91 pickup with a 7.4 liter in it. This is not really the ideal daily driver. It's terrible on fuel. This is a toy. That truck will probably only get 10, 20, 30,000 kilometers tops in the next 10 years. So we want to make sure that it doesn't leak, that it's reliable, that the bearings are clean, that it has good compression, and if it passes all those things, then we're just going to put some new plugs in it, seal it up, front rear main seal, oil pan gasket obviously, make sure clearances are good, and we're going to put it back in the truck and have some fun with it. The more we get into this project, the more expensive the truck is going to be, and it's right at the tipping point as to how much the car is going to be worth. Take my Fleetmaster for an example. I built this car, probably have, if I counted all my labor, and we built this one with Truth for Teens and the charity, and we're able to give a sizable donation to the charity. Now that Fleetmaster, I had a pile of time in that. If I counted all my time and labor in there, and that wasn't the point of the build, we'd be up to $30,000 easy. And the car will only ever be worth $20,000 tops. This 91 truck is basically the same. It's a 91, it's not original paint, it's not the original engine, so it's a desirable car, but it's not a collectible. So we're gonna have some fun with it, make it dependable and reliable, but it doesn't have to be perfect, because nothing really ever is. Well, actually, if you see that, I'm not too thrilled about that. So we'll throw a set of bearings in that. When you put the bearings back in again, there's no elasticity left. It should spread out a little bit. That's not a good sign. So that's pretty loose. I'm definitely not putting those back in again. And so the plot thickens. Can't even put them on. 3/8 torque spec for a 3/8 is 50 foot-pounds. I think if it's 7/16, it's a bit more. She's broken. Time for a new torque wrench, or at least a ratchet. Tip of the tooth snapped off, but you have a reverse and a forward. I never use my torque wrench to break anything loose, so I'll just switch the gears, these teeth over. It'll be good as new. And these teeth are not reversible because it's got a piece on one end and that sits in a slot, and the angle just isn't reversible. Honestly, I'm very disappointed with Ultra Pro tools. I've had about 4 or 5 ratchets from them. I don't recommend Ultra Pro. Very disappointed with the toolbox, and basically everything that I bought from them, not happy with them. Comment if you guys have had better luck, but I won't buy Ultra Pro anymore. So that's just my 2 cents. My 1/2 inch will work. But it's at the bottom of its scale. I like to have a torque wrench that goes in the middle. Hope you can see that, but I do have 2 thou of clearance. So the bearings aren't worn at all. They're just maybe pitted from sitting. So that gives me confidence that the rings in that are okay. I'm gonna put this bearing back on, torque it, slap the oil pan on it, grab a filter for it real quick, and then if it passes the compression test, then we'll replace all the bearings again real quick. That's the order I'm doing it. Here we go. Holy jumping. Whoever thought a 454 was a good idea? Oh, jeez Louise. That looks nice and clean. I'm very happy with that. Before we're gonna start cranking the engine over with a compression test, just take an old distributor and a good drill and just crank it over. GMs run clockwise, Pontiacs run counterclockwise. You need to, the oil pump is driven off that little flange in there, and the oil travels through this little part here. So you can't just grab a screwdriver because you won't feed both banks. Pop it in until you see it match, and pull the trigger and wait for oil to come out. Once you got oil everywhere, you can put your original distributor back in again so it's getting oiled as it cranks over, or just keep giving it oil pressure between each crank. pull all your spark plugs, wide open throttle. You want to take a look at them too, make sure they're not all rusty. Tips look pretty good, a little bit wet. I don't know why is that. Two of them are a little bit fuel soaked. I don't know what that's about. Or oil, I don't know, we'll see. We're gonna replace them anyway, but compression test will tell us a lot. $140, holding, happy with that. Oh, uh-oh, I'm wondering if somebody sprayed oil in there. That's not gonna tell me if the rings leak. I'll have to ask them. Otherwise, good maintenance. 150. Nothing's flying out when I'm cranking it over, but it's some moisture or something. Next, all four of those are 150. So the other side, you get the point. Okay, so we did our compression test, and I know that the reason why we were getting so much oil coming out is because there was oil. I can actually see oil in one of the pistons here. When I flipped it over, oil went up. I should have done the compression test before I flipped it over. Needless to say, I'm happy with those readings, so we're gonna use this engine. I didn't like the looks of the bearings. I just seen a little bit of dirt going through. This is one of the rod bearings. The main looked worse from what I remember. So we're gonna pull them out one at a time. 2-bolt mains with a 3/8 stud get torqued to 50 foot-pounds. If it is a 7/16, then it is 60 foot-pounds. We're not pulling the heads at all, so we're just doing a bearing roll in the mains and on each one of the rods, and then we'll plastic gauge a couple of them just to make sure our clearance is right, and then throwing the pan back on it, and away we go. So take the caps off. Whatever you do, don't hit it with a steel hammer. You can try a rubber mallet just to tap it because they kind of bind on the studs, or just grab a vice grip and very gently on the cap, just kind of grab it, and then it comes right off. Don't make a liar of me, come on. Oh, the other ones came off so nice. All right, you can do it. Let go, let go, let go. There it is. All right, you can see that the bearing is stuck on stayed on the crank. There's really no elasticity left in that bearing. And it's a good time to replace that. Peel that off. Again, you can see the scoring, which is why we're doing this. You push the piston down. Try not to let the studs hit the crankshaft. Use your fingers. Your fingers will get better on its own. The crankshaft does not. Again, this bearing stayed with the crank, which means that it's a little bit worn. You can tilt it to the side. Now you can get at it nicely, wipe it off, and then pop your bearing in. I've always had good luck with Clevite bearings. This is part number, and look at that, you proud Americans. For an engine like this, I take them pretty much out of the package, and I try not to touch the bearing because it's not a fresh rebuild, so there is dirt and that around the block, and it's very easy to contaminate it. I usually use assembly lube for brand new engines that I know are spotless, but for this, just because it's cleaner, I'm using white lithium grease. Try not to touch it, push the tab in so it seats, and then pull it right back into place again. Same for the top. I just grab it by the very edges, pop it in place, push it down. Now I'm not gonna put any grease on this one yet. I'm going to try and stop sweating on it. We're gonna grab a piece of plastic gauge and we'll put it on there. So plastic gauge is just this magical little, we'll call it Play-Doh. You just lay it on the top, or you can lay it in your bearing. Torque your cap down, making sure that your numbers line up with each other. Torque down your cap evenly. Plastic gauge comes in a piece of paper with markings on it. One side's millimeter for those people, and the other one is for
that, and we have 2 thou clearance, which is tight, but acceptable. You want between 2 and 5 thou generally, and that's just for the oil clearance. So, supposedly it washes away, but I think it does restrict it a little bit, so I always just carefully scrape it off and wipe it down. Another reason I like the white lithium grease is it squeezes out a little bit and guarantees that you've done that bore. So the main bearing caps, we want to do it without pulling the crank. We're just going to do one at a time. You pull the bolts out, give it a little pull. You can see same kind of lines on there. We got a little bit of pitting in there, which is why we want to replace it. It's this one underneath the crank that's a little bit tricky. So off your balancer bolt on the front, you can rotate the engine until you see the oil hole. And then you take a machine screw, you shave off the top, put a little bend on it, and stick it in the hole. Then just rotate. And there's your bearing. Keep in mind that the bottom one has the groove in it so that the oil comes through the oil hole. The one on the cap does not have the hole. So if you put the wrong bearing on the bottom, you'll wreck your engine in about 30 seconds. So, a little oops that I didn't think of before. That little bolt has a chance to drop into the oil gallery if your engine's upside down because gravity sucks. So, hopefully I can wiggle it and drop it back into the crankshaft and keep it rolling. Most commonly the bearing rolls are done while it's in an in-frame, so your engine's up above you, so I've never ran into that. I did one on a Cummins once, I think, and I got away with it. You might get away with it, you might not, but it's a good idea to do the bearing roll right side up. I got lucky that time. So from here on in, we'll do the bearing roll with it like this. That's why we make the video, so you learn from me. You don't make a mistake. Okay, so on a 4-bolt main, your torque spec is 110, and you kind of want to balance, like take turns walking through. If you take the whole crank out, start in the center, work your way out. On a 2-bolt main, torque on those bolts is 95. And for the plastic gauge, it's done exactly the same as the rod. There's a couple different theories on how to do it. One theory is it doesn't matter, and the second theory is you have to have the engine sitting straight up and down as it would be in the car because the weight of the crank would be down to measure the plastic gauge or your thickness on your main bearings. I always do that because it makes more sense. It makes sense to me that the crank is hanging down. It could be 1 or 2 thou off with the weight of the crank sitting down on the bearing. So you can do it however you like. I do it with it right side up. When you're pushing the bearing back in again, make sure that the knob is on the high side, and generally you can push them back in with your fingers if it's all good. That was with one hand. You can just tap it flush there with a screwdriver, just catching the very lip of it, making sure you don't touch the crank. And then plastic gauge and torque her down. This main here has a scooch less. That's about 3 thou clearance. Definitely not 2. But well within spec, so we're good to go. It's always a good idea to just go over every one again. Make sure that nothing was forgotten. Rods and mains. Helps everybody sleep good at night. If it's torque to yield, you might want to set the torque setting to a bit lower if it's on a different engine. Somewhere in between your last degrees, you know that if it turns a little bit, then that wasn't torqued, and you can start over from scratch. Put the oil pan back on, and we can flip her over last time. So you can see not that you're supposed to have chunks of piston laying in your oil pan, but you can see the buildup, a little bit of sludge there, some yeah, kind of gross. And then you see this nice clean oil pan. Look at that. Look at that. We'll just wipe that one down, and no risk of any of this stuff coming through. Yeah. Oil pans like that make me pretty happy because it kind of verifies that this is a very low kilometer engine. So here we go. Okay, so I had to take the front balancer off with my puller kit. This one off of the 88 had a 3/8 coarse thread. The balancer off of the 454-91 had the 4-bolt main, has 3/8 fine thread to pull that off. So we'll see what the timing chain looks like behind here. Hopefully that's okay. Just a row of bolts along the top, and then on the bottom we're going to change that front seal, clean this cover up a bit so it doesn't start leaking. There's a little bit of play here, you can see that in the timing chain, but it's not bad if you compare it to like the old 454, where you can see way more. It's probably about twice as bad on that, so it's not great, but it's passable. It's right on the borderline, but we're gonna let it go. I'm surprised to see like Teflon teeth on there. Kind of odd, but we're gonna leave that. Just a chisel, wood chisel, just to scrape the gasket off, wire wheel it. Got the timing cover, it's in decent shape. I put the new seal in, just knocked the old one out. Take some sandpaper, clean the inside of the bore. I used, I didn't have, my seal pusher wasn't big enough, so I just used an old release bearing, popped that on there, and then used my adapter to push on that, tap it in, bottom it out. And then we've got our gasket. This is a 2-piece rear main now, so I have to use the original oil pan from this, which is much better shape actually than the 454 oil pan, which is over there. And for this gasket, I love this spray gasket tack. It just puts a little bit of stickiness to it, holds the gasket in place, and seems to fill all the little imperfections on older stuff. I never really had a leak, so you just spray it on and then let it get tacky for about 5 minutes and then put it on. So here we go. Now because this plate has dowels that center the front cover to the engine, you don't have to put the front pulley, the balancer, in before you put the plate on. If this dowel isn't here and the plate front cover on engines have room to move, you need to put the balancer in, which will center the cover around the crankshaft and then tighten it down. It took automakers, especially GM, a while to get the intake gaskets right. It wasn't until like the 2000s they finally figured it out. They've got a 4-piece gasket. So we've got some little tabs that go on holes, and then you've got paper gaskets here and another rubber one at the back. The Vortex of the late 90s, I think they just had a thing of silicone on there. I don't know, kind of dumb, but the gasket tack won't work there. You gotta use some actual ultra gray or black. I like this because it stays flexible pretty good. And I'm still pretty generous with it. If it leaks out a little bit, not a big deal, like so. Put a little bit, look at that, a little bit right up top there. The main thing is between where the head meets the block. I usually just snug it down, let the silicone harden up just a little bit, and then torque it down. Oil pan gaskets the same way. Let's just make it out of like 12 pieces. Actually 4, but I put a little bit of silicone there, just a little dab. A little bit on that one. Just a dab on there. There. That just sits in there like that. Push that nicely down. These have little knobs in there, just push them. Anyway, you get the idea. I'll put a little bit of silicone underneath this gasket. I don't put anything on top because I find that the gaskets tend to squeeze out from the end. Definitely put a little bit extra on the corners here, and then drop her on. A nice clean oil pan. The oil pan bolts go to 12 foot-pounds. The intake manifold goes to 25 foot-pounds. Okay, you want to bring number 1 on top dead center of compression. So if your line is kind of lined up with your marker, you want to be able to push down on these, then you know you're at top dead center. Put your valve cover back on again, push your gasket in. Now this only gets torqued to about 3 foot-pounds, so don't over torque it. It's very easy to over torque it. And these, I see these holes aren't lining up 100%. So I gotta see what I'm gonna do about that. I'm gonna have to drill them out a little bit. There's a little line, see the line? That thing has to sit inside there, and I guess that's a little different on these heads than the other heads. See how it's not in the center? I had to drill the hole out a little bit, but it is sitting down nice and flush now. Before it was actually a gap there. All right, pay close attention to your flywheel when you're taking it apart. Some of them say engine side. If they don't, make a note on it. You can just write on it. Especially if there's a ring. Sometimes the ring goes on the back as a spacer. Otherwise, it goes on the front. That could be to spread the torque out evenly over it. The thing to keep in mind is that when you've got it in place and you've got your bell housing bolts tight, that the torque converter isn't bound up on it at all. You want to be able to spin that by hand. There should be like an 1/8 of an inch gap, and then you should be able to pull the torque converter tight. When you're tightening up the torque converter, unfortunately you have to put all the bolts in, but not tighten them, because if you get to the last one, you won't get your bolt in. So put the 5 in, then you can tighten the 6th one all the way, and then go around again. Making sure that you pull the bolts in almost all the way, so they don't bind up anywhere, but free enough that the torque converter is still able to move. Just little tricks to save you some time. One of the comments was like, that forklift must get pretty tiring. Why don't you get a cherry picker? And I'm like, why would I pump by hand when I can do it automatically? This is what I meant by the torque converter having that little bit of play. And then once you draw these tight, they'll pull the torque converter up. We're golden. We're almost there. So me trying to be efficient while I was underneath the truck, throw all my tools under for the starter and the exhaust. I'm like, oh, might as well hook up my torque converter and we'll just spin it around a random amount of times. Don't have to crawl underneath again. Let's just put that distributor, for crap's sake. So maybe just finish everything up at the top. It's because I didn't have plugs and a cap and a rotor for it. Put your distributor in, then start rolling it over. But simple enough, put your finger in the hole. You can put your socket on the alternator, spin it over, you can feel the compressor coming up, and then that's your top dead center number 1. Spark plug gaps are 35 thou. Take your cap, point your rotor at one of these plugs. Doesn't really matter. I think there's a general starting point. I'll look it up online real quick. All I know is 153624. I don't know what these extra 2 are for, but firing order's on here, and it is 1843657 I'll take their word for it. So I put number 1 right after this little bolt for the cap, and make sure that you got enough swing that it's not hitting anything, that you can play with the timing. Put your fork in, leave it nice and snug, put your cap on, start running your wires. Now, that being said, I don't own a timing light. I think I did a long time ago. I haven't done one of these since forever. So, might have to try and find somebody with a timing light. If you're interested in buying this truck and you have a timing light, I'll come visit you and show off the truck, and then we'll set the timing, do a burnout in your driveway, and then you can decide whether you want the truck or not. A couple of extra things I had to do was the oil pressure sensor. I had to put it on the oil filter there. It used to be on the side of the block, so I had to lengthen those wires and get an adapter to make that fit. Mess around with the exhaust a little bit, broken studs and whatever else, but let's see if it'll fire now anyway. Well, that sounds really good. That's not so bad for first start. I'll make sure all the fluids are in. I don't hear anything running out, so that's good. Look at that. All hazy. Perfect. It's gonna be a good day. Gotta get some coolant, and then let's take it for a rip. Here we go. Good oil pressure, I got like 3/4 tank of fuel. I have to drive it too. I can afford to drive it. $1.30 to a liter. Ouch. Spilled some oil. All right, she's running on all 8. Time to get rid of some of these cobwebs. Take her on the road for a little booteroony. If nothing else, it makes really good noises. And the nice thing is that it needs new tires too. See how bald and weather cracked these are? That's no good. It needs some new tires. Temperature's behaving. Now my engine light's on because there's a sensor on that right head that broke off, and I don't know what it is, if that's a knock sensor or what. Oh, it's charging, good oil pressure. I'm not gonna run the AC just yet. Brake check, yep. Throttle check, yep. So far so good. We got good oil pressure, temperature is staying very low. Checked all my fluids. So yeah, so far so good. This brings back lots of memories. My first truck was a 91 half-ton 4x, regular cab long box of course. My next one was a 96 regular cab long box of course. Never really driven a short box, but nice little truck. It's just the interior, the way the seat feels, the way the doors close, the way the headliner sags. Oh, that's pretty cool. I want to go check out that house. Neighbor's selling a house for 1.1 million. I'm just wondering why it's worth so much. But yeah, good memories. I was never one of the cool kids to have a full-size truck as my first truck, but I'm glad I didn't because it's not very good on fuel. So, yeah, temperature's good, oil pressure's good, no funny noises. Oh, that's some nice cars. I guess the only thing left to do is kill these tires. Confidence is taking the truck around the block, then doing a burnout in the shop, and then taking it out on the highway. Truck feels great. I just wanted to shake it out. I have some exhaust to drop off at Lyle's. I got to meet Aaron to drop off the cards. I figure might as well take it on a little test drive. Oil pressure is perfect. Temperature has never got hotter than 90, so that's perfect. It's charging nicely, but the air conditioner does not work. So it is still for sale. Basically what it was before plus my bill. So we're looking for 14.5 Canadian, which is a steal. It's only like 8 grand US. So a nice clean truck. Everything works except the AC right now. I gotta get rid of that engine light, but I think it's the sensor on the passenger side. We'll throw a scanner on it, but it will be fixed by the time you get it. But yeah, anyway, thanks for watching. Fun little drive in the truck, a little bit of reminiscing on my 90s truck. We're gonna go out for a date with my wife and bring her back to the owner next week. So here we go.